Jake Morrison was tired. His feet hurt, his back ached, and all he wanted was to fall into bed and sleep for 12 hours straight. He had been working for 14 hours without a break, running around the embassy station like a chicken with its head cut off. Everyone needed something. The conference rooms needed to be checked. The schedules needed to be updated. The catering staff had questions about dietary requirements for alien delegates. It never ended. He walked down the corridor toward his quarters, his uniform wrinkled and his hair a mess. Tomorrow would be the big day. The peace summit between humanity and the Velkari Empire would officially begin, and everyone was nervous. 3 years of fighting had left both sides exhausted and angry. This summit was supposed to fix everything, but Jake had his doubts. He had seen how complicated these things could get. Jake was just a lieutenant commander, a junior officer who handled paperwork and logistics. He was not important enough to sit at the negotiation table. Ambassador Lisa Patterson led the human delegation, and she had made it clear that she wanted everything to run smoothly. No mistakes, no problems, just perfect execution of a carefully planned event. His room was number 247B, located in the diplomatic wing near the service corridors. It was small but comfortable, with a bed, a desk, a small bathroom, and a window that looked out at the planet below. Centauri Prime was beautiful from orbit, a blue and green world that reminded him of Earth. He swiped his keycard at the door and heard the familiar beep as it unlocked. Jake stepped inside and let the door close behind him. He kicked off his boots without even turning on the main lights. The room was dim, lit only by the soft blue glow coming through the window. He was already thinking about the hot shower he was going to take when something made him stop. There was someone in his room. His heart jumped into his throat. He could see a figure sitting in the chair by the window, perfectly still and watching him. For a moment, Jake thought about running back out into the corridor and calling security, but his body would not move. He was frozen in place, staring at the intruder. Then the figure moved slightly and the light from the window caught her features. Jake's blood turned to ice. It was her, the Empress. Selenith herself. He recognized her immediately from all the briefing materials he had studied. She was impossible to mistake. Her body was covered in dark chitin armor that gleamed with a natural polish. Bioluminescent patterns ran along her arms and shoulders, glowing softly in shades of blue and purple. She had 4 arms, all folded in a way that the briefing documents had said meant she was calm and thinking. Her head was elegant and angular, with large compound eyes that caught the light like jewels. She was the ruler of the Velkari Empire, one of the most powerful beings in known space. And she was sitting in his room. Jake's mind went blank. He had been trained for many situations, but not this one. What was the protocol for finding an alien empress in your quarters? Should he bow? Should he call someone? Should he apologize for disturbing her? What came out of his mouth was probably the stupidest thing he could have said. You're in the wrong room. The Empress turned her head toward him. Her compound eyes were unreadable, but Jake had the distinct impression she was amused. When she spoke, her voice came through a small translator device attached to her chest. The voice was clear and precise with just a hint of something that might have been humor. I know. Jake stood there like an idiot, his hand hovering near his communicator. He should press it. He should call security right now. This was a massive security breach. The Empress of the Velkari Empire had somehow gotten into his quarters without anyone noticing. This could be an assassination attempt. This could be a test. This could be a dozen different things, none of them good. But she had not moved. She just sat there in his chair watching him with those strange eyes. If she wanted to kill him, he would already be dead. The Velkari were fast and deadly when they wanted to be. If she wanted to hurt the human delegation, she would not be sitting alone in a junior officer's room. I should call security, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. You could, Selenith replied. Her translator made her words sound smooth and calm. But I would prefer you did not. Not yet. Jake's hand stayed near his communicator, but he did not press it. Something about her tone made him pause. She did not sound threatening. She sounded almost tired, maybe even a little desperate. Why are you here? Jake asked. He took a small step toward the door, keeping his exit clear. If you wanted a secret meeting with our delegation, there are proper channels. The ambassador would meet with you. We have protocols for this kind of thing. Would she? The Empress made a gesture with one of her upper hands. Or would she have declined? And if she accepted, she would have brought advisors and security personnel and recorders. Everything would become official. Everything would be documented and analyzed. Every word would be political. Jake could not argue with that. Ambassador Patterson was good at her job, which meant she was careful. Very careful. She would never meet with the Empress alone without witnesses or records. It would be too risky, too easy for something to go wrong. So you broke into a junior officer's quarters instead? Jake heard the words coming out of his mouth and winced. He should not be talking to the Empress like this. He should be formal and respectful. But his brain was not working properly. He was too tired and too shocked to filter his thoughts. To his surprise, the Empress made a sound that her translator interpreted as a soft laugh. When you say it that way, it does sound ridiculous, but yes, that is exactly what I did. She shifted in the chair, and Jake noticed that she was not wearing her full ceremonial armor. She had on what looked like a simpler version, maybe something for traveling quietly. The bioluminescent patterns on her body were dimmed, not glowing as brightly as they had been in the official hollows he had seen. I needed to speak with a human, she continued. Not a diplomat, not a politician. Just a human. Someone who would tell me the truth instead of carefully constructed responses designed to reveal nothing. Jake stared at her. His brain was starting to work again, slowly processing what she had just said. And you think I will give you that? The truth? I think you have less reason to lie to me than your superiors do. You have no great career to protect with careful words. You are tired and frustrated with bureaucracy. You have been filling out requisition forms for 3 days instead of doing anything meaningful. She tilted her head slightly. Your personnel file was quite informative. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. She had accessed his records. She knew about him. This was not a random choice. She had picked him specifically for some reason. He should be alarmed. He should be calling for help. Instead, he found himself almost wanting to laugh. You're not wrong, he admitted. The Empress made that sound again, the one that might have been amusement. And despite everything, despite the insanity of the situation, Jake felt some of his fear start to fade. She was not here to hurt him. She was here because she wanted something. Information, maybe, or perspective. And somehow, for reasons he did not fully understand, Jake decided to stay and listen. All right, he said slowly. I won't call security, not yet. But you need to tell me why you're really here. The Empress looked at him for a long moment. Then she began to speak, and Jake realized that his quiet, boring evening had just become the most important night of his life. The Empress leaned back in the chair, and Jake noticed how the blue light from the window made her chitin armor shimmer. She looked like something from a dream or maybe a nightmare, but her voice, when it came through the translator, sounded almost human in its weariness. I am facing a crisis within my own government, she said. There are those among my military commanders who do not want peace with humanity. They want war. They believe humans are weak, that your rapid expansion is nothing but luck. They think the Velkari Empire should crush your species before you become a real threat. Jake felt his stomach tighten. This was classified information, the kind of thing that could change the entire summit. Why are you telling me this? Because I need to understand something, Selenith said. She leaned forward, and her compound eyes seemed to focus on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. 30 years ago, humans were trapped in one star system. Now you have 47 colonies spread across multiple sectors. Every prediction we made about your expansion was wrong. You should not have survived first contact with the Zaroth raiders. You should not have held the Kepler line against our fleet. She paused, and Jake could hear something like frustration in her translated voice. By every tactical analysis, by every computer model, by every historical comparison, humanity should have been conquered or destroyed 3 times over. But you are still here. You keep surviving. You keep growing stronger. She tilted her head. How? Jake did not answer right away. His mind was racing. This was not a conversation he was prepared for. He was not a strategist or a military analyst. He was just a guy who organized schedules and made sure conference rooms had enough chairs. But the Empress was looking at him, waiting for an answer, and he realized that maybe that was exactly why she had come to him. She did not want an official answer. She wanted a real one. We're terrified, Jake said finally. The words came out before he could stop them. That's the secret. We're scared out of our minds. The Empress made a sound that her translator could not quite interpret. Confusion, maybe. Explain, so Jake did. He moved away from the door and sat down on the edge of his bed. If he was going to have this conversation, he might as well be comfortable. Humans went to the stars knowing we were late to the party. Every species we met was older than us, more advanced, more established. We were the new kids, and everyone else had already figured out the rules. He rubbed his tired eyes, trying to find the right words. Our first colony ship was attacked by pirates before it even reached its destination. Half the colonists died. The survivors had to turn mining equipment into weapons just to stay alive. That set the tone for everything that came after. The Empress listened without interrupting. Jake could not read her expressions, but he had the feeling she was taking in every word. We learned early that the galaxy does not care about fair fights, Jake continued. Nobody was going to help us. Nobody was going to give us a chance to catch up. So we stopped expecting fairness. We stopped playing by the rules because the rules were designed by species who had centuries to learn them. He thought about the stories he had heard, the legends that every human in space knew by heart. Every human ship carries backup weapon systems. Not the official ones, but things cobbled together from spare parts and desperation. Every colony has evacuation plans and hidden supply caches. Every human who goes into space knows that the official protocols are just guidelines. The real rule is simpler: survive. That is not a military strategy, the Empress said. That is chaos. Maybe, Jake agreed. But it works. You mentioned the Battle of Kepler. I was not there, but I know the story. Everyone does. He took a breath, remembering the details. Your tactical analysis was right. We should have lost. We were outgunned and out of time. Your fleet was bigger, better armed, and better positioned. By every logical measure, we had already lost before the battle even started. And yet you held the line, Solanith said quietly. Because Commander Lisa Bennett did something your admirals would never do, Jake said. She asked for volunteers. 43 civilian transport pilots raised their hands. They evacuated their crews, pointed their ships at your dreadnoughts, and overrode every safety system they had. They turned cargo haulers into missiles. Into bombs. They rammed their ships into yours at full speed with the fusion cores set to overload. He saw the Empress go very still. That is not courage. That is insanity. Maybe both, Jake said. But those 43 pilots saved the colony. They saved thousands of lives. And they did it because they were desperate. And desperate humans will do things that nobody expects. Things that should not work but somehow do. The room was quiet for a moment. Jake could hear his own breathing and the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Outside the window, Centauri Prime continued its slow rotation, beautiful and indifferent to the conversation happening above it. Every species you have conquered or allied with had time, Jake said. Time to develop their culture, their technology, their place in the galaxy. They knew who they were before they met the rest of the universe. Humans did not have that luxury. We had 50 years of knowing we were not alone, and most of that time was spent fighting to survive. He looked at the Empress directly, meeting those alien eyes. We are still figuring out who we are as a species. We are still learning how to exist in a galaxy that does not want us here, and that makes us unpredictable. Dangerous, maybe, but also unstoppable in a weird way because we do not know when to quit. And you believe this is why we should make peace? Solanith asked. No, Jake said. You should make peace because we are not going anywhere and neither are you. This is the reality. Humans exist. We have colonies and ships and weapons. You exist. You have an empire that has lasted 2,000 years. We can keep fighting until we both collapse, or we can figure out how to exist in the same galaxy without killing each other. He leaned forward slightly. You can have an unpredictable ally or an unpredictable enemy. One of those options means both our species are still here in 100 years. The other means we pour all our resources into destroying each other, while every other power in the galaxy watches and waits to pick up the pieces. The Empress stood up, her full height impressive even in the small room. Jake tensed, wondering if he had said too much. But she did not seem angry. She seemed thoughtful. Your ambassador will say similar things tomorrow, she said, in more diplomatic language with carefully chosen words. Probably, Jake admitted. But she will say it in a conference room with 20 witnesses and official recorders. You came here tonight because you needed to hear it from someone who was not performing for an audience. You are correct. The Empress moved toward the window, looking out at the planet below. There is another reason I chose you, Lieutenant Commander Morrison. Your file indicates you were aboard the medical ship Mercy, during the Tau Ceti plague outbreak. Jake's throat went tight. He had not thought about that in months. I was. Your ship responded to a distress call from a Velkari colony world. This was during the border conflicts when our species were actively fighting. You could have ignored the call. Military protocol suggested you should have. Instead, your captain brought medical supplies and doctors. Jake remembered. He remembered the fear and the chaos and the smell of the sick. We had supplies to spare. 17 of your crew died from exposure to the plague, the Empress said quietly. Your own protocol said you should have maintained quarantine. But your medical staff went into the outbreak zones anyway. She turned to face him. That colony was my birthplace. My sister's children were among those you saved. The silence in the room was heavy. Jake did not know what to say. He had not known that the colony they helped had any connection to the Empress. Nobody on the Mercy had known. They had just responded to a distress call because that was what you did. You helped people who needed help, even if they were supposed to be your enemy. I need to know if that was unusual, Selenith said. Her voice was soft through the translator. I need to know if that was one strange incident or if it is part of your species' nature. Part of the same madness that makes you ram ships into dreadnoughts. Jake thought about it carefully. He wanted to give her an honest answer. Both, he said finally. We are terrified and reckless and stupid enough to help people even when it hurts us. Because we know what it feels like to need help and not get it. He stood up and walked to the window, standing a few feet away from her. The galaxy did not welcome us. Every inch of space we hold, we had to fight for it. We clawed and scraped and bled for every colony, every station, every trade route. And maybe because of that, when we see someone else suffering, even an enemy, we remember what it felt like to be desperate and alone. The Empress was quiet for a long moment. Then she returned to the chair and sat down again. What was supposed to be a brief conversation stretched into something longer. She began to talk about things that Jake knew were not in any human intelligence files. She told him about internal Velkari politics, about the pressure she faced from military factions who saw peace as weakness. She explained how the Empire had existed for 2,000 years by conquering and absorbing other species. Peace with humanity, treating them as equals instead of future subjects, went against everything her people believed about themselves. My military commanders look at human expansion and see a threat that must be eliminated, she said. They do not understand that the threat is already here. You cannot be eliminated now without destroying both our species. But they refuse to see this truth. Jake listened and asked questions. He forgot to be nervous. He forgot that he was talking to one of the most powerful beings in known space. She was just someone with a problem, trying to find a solution, and he was someone who might be able to help. In return, he told her about human fears that never made it into diplomatic reports. The constant worry that first contact with the wrong species would be the end of humanity. The feeling that they were playing a game they did not understand, with rules nobody had explained. The desperate hope that they could find real friends among the stars before they made a fatal mistake. Your military hardliners think we are weak, Jake said. But I have read reports about your empire too. Your hardliners think you are weak. They think peace with humanity is the same as surrender. They are not entirely wrong, the Empress admitted. The Velkari way has always been expansion and strength. To choose peace with a species as young as yours, to treat you as equals. She made a gesture of frustration with her lower left hand. It contradicts everything my people have believed about themselves for 2,000 years. But you are here anyway, Jake said. Because I have seen the projections. I have access to computer models that my commanders choose to ignore. If we go to war with humanity, truly to war with no holding back, the best outcome is that both our species are crippled. We will be weak and vulnerable, and the other powers in the galaxy will not sit quietly while we destroy each other. The Zaroth Collective will move in. The Krenth Federation will claim what is left. We will both lose everything. Jake nodded slowly. Mutual destruction. Yes, but I cannot show my people those projections and expect them to accept peace out of fear. The Velkari do not respond well to threats of defeat. We respond to demonstrations of strength and respect. She paused and looked at him directly. I came here tonight hoping to understand what makes humanity strong. Now I believe I do. What is that? Jake asked. Adaptability. Not the slow kind that takes generations, but immediate, desperate innovation. You told me about ramming ships into our dreadnoughts. That tactic worked once. Now we have defenses against it. But the next time we face humanity in battle, you will have invented something new. Something we cannot predict. Because you were faced with a problem and refused to accept that there was no solution. Jake almost laughed. That is not really strength. That is more like stubborn refusal to admit when we are beaten. The Empress made that sound again. The one that might have been laughter. Perhaps. But it is effective. She stood up and Jake realized that their conversation was coming to an end. I will leave you now. When the summit begins tomorrow, your ambassador and I will negotiate terms for a trade agreement and mutual defense pact. The discussions will be difficult, but they will succeed. How can you be sure? Jake asked. Because tonight I received what I needed. Perspective, understanding, and tomorrow I will give something in return. She moved toward the door, then stopped, and turned back to him. In 6 months there will be a joint science expedition to the Maelstrom Nebula. Both our species will send ships and crew. I will personally recommend that you be appointed as the human liaison officer for this expedition. Jake stared at her. That is a huge career opportunity. Why would you do that? Because you stumbled into an impossible situation tonight and chose honesty over protocol. That is exactly the kind of thinking this expedition will need. She touched the door controls and the door slid open silently. Also because you were right. I needed to speak with just a human tonight, not a diplomat or politician. And you gave me truth when I needed it most. Will we talk about this tomorrow? Officially, I mean? Jake asked. No, this conversation never happened, but its effects will ripple outward nonetheless. The Empress stepped into the corridor, then looked back at him one more time. Sleep well, Lieutenant Commander. Tomorrow you will wake to find that the galaxy has changed, and you will be one of the few people who understands why. She walked away down the corridor, her footsteps surprisingly quiet for someone her size. Jake watched her go, then closed the door and stood alone in his quarters. His heart was still racing. His hands were shaking slightly. He looked around the room, at the chair where she had been sitting, at the window where they had both stood looking out at Centauri Prime. Had that really just happened? Had he really just spent hours talking with the Empress of the Velkari Empire about war and peace and human nature? It seemed impossible, insane, like something from a dream. But it had happened. The chair was still warm where she had been sitting. The door had opened and closed. She had been here in his room, asking him questions that would normally be directed at ambassadors and military commanders. Jake sat down on his bed and put his head in his hands. He needed to tell someone. He needed to report this. But the Empress had said the conversation never happened, and he understood why. If anyone knew about this meeting, it would cause problems. Questions, investigations. It would turn something simple and honest into a political incident. He thought about what she had said, about the summit succeeding, about the recommendation for the expedition. She was giving him a gift, a chance to be part of something bigger than himself. But more than that, she was trusting him to keep quiet about tonight. Jake made a decision. He would tell Ambassador Patterson, but only her and only after the summit began. She deserved to know why the Empress might be more cooperative than expected, but he would keep the details private, the exact words, the honest conversation, the vulnerability they had both shown, that would remain between him and Selenith. He lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible now, even though he was exhausted. His mind kept replaying the conversation, the way she had asked about human survival, the way she had revealed her own fears and doubts. Tomorrow, the galaxy would change. Treaties would be signed. Alliances would be formed. And he would be standing on the sidelines watching it happen, knowing that he had played a small but crucial part in making it possible. You're in the wrong room, he had said. I know, she had replied. And somehow, in being in the wrong place at the wrong time, they had found a way forward that neither of their peoples had managed through proper diplomatic channels. Jake finally closed his eyes and let exhaustion take him. Tomorrow would be interesting. Jake woke up the next morning convinced he had dreamed the whole thing. The conversation with the Empress seemed too strange, too impossible to be real. But when he sat up and looked at the chair by the window, he knew it had happened. The chair was still positioned slightly differently than he usually kept it. The air in the room still had a faint smell that was not quite human, a reminder that someone else had been there. He got ready quickly, putting on a fresh uniform and trying to calm his racing thoughts. He needed to talk to Ambassador Patterson before the summit began. He needed to tell her something, even if he could not tell her everything. When he arrived at the ambassador's office, her assistant told him she was too busy to see anyone. Jake insisted it was important. After 10 minutes of waiting, the assistant finally let him in. Ambassador Patterson looked tired. She had probably been up all night going over last-minute preparations. Her desk was covered with datapads and reports. She looked up at Jake with mild annoyance. "This better be important, Morrison. We have 3 hours until the opening session." "It is, ma'am," Jake said. He closed the door behind him. "Last night I had an unexpected visitor." He told her a carefully edited version of what had happened. He mentioned that the Empress had come to his quarters for an informal conversation. He explained that she wanted to understand human perspectives outside of official diplomatic channels. He shared some of what they had discussed, focusing on the strategic elements rather than the personal details. To her credit, Ambassador Patterson did not explode or panic. She listened carefully, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock to thoughtful consideration. When Jake finished, she sat back in her chair and studied him for a long moment. "You should have called security immediately," she said finally. "But I understand why you did not." She rubbed her temples. "This is either the best thing that could have happened or a complete disaster. We will find out which in a few hours." "She said the summit will succeed," Jake offered. "Let us hope she is right." Patterson stood up and walked to her window. "I am reassigning you effective immediately. You will be on my personal staff as a cultural liaison specialist. If the Empress chose to speak with you, that means you have some value beyond paperwork." She turned back to him. "And Morrison? If you ever find yourself in another wrong room situation, please inform me within 24 hours. Before the other party leaves, preferably." Jake felt relief wash over him. He had expected anger or punishment. Instead, the ambassador was giving him a promotion. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you, ma'am. Do not thank me yet. This job is going to be much harder than filling out requisition forms." She waved him away. "Go get some coffee. The summit starts in 3 hours and I need you alert." The opening session of the summit was held in the largest conference room on the station. The room was designed to impress, with high ceilings and large windows showing the stars beyond. Human delegates sat on one side of a massive table. Velkari delegates sat on the other side. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake stood near the back wall with other junior staff members. He watched as Ambassador Patterson and Empress Selanith took their seats at opposite ends of the table. They greeted each other formally, following all the proper protocols. Nothing in their behavior suggested they had any connection beyond what was official and public. But then the Empress did something unexpected. As the session began, she made a concession on trade routes that human intelligence had predicted she would never agree to. She offered access to 3 contested systems in exchange for technology sharing agreements. The human delegates exchanged confused glances. This was too easy, too generous. Ambassador Patterson recovered quickly. She reciprocated with an offer of medical technology and research data. The Velkari delegates seemed surprised but pleased. The conversation flowed more smoothly than anyone had predicted. As the morning session progressed, more agreements were reached. Both sides seemed willing to compromise in ways that shocked their own staff members. Jake watched the Empress carefully. She never looked in his direction, never acknowledged him in any way. But he knew. He knew that last night's conversation had changed something fundamental. During a break, one of the human military advisors approached Ambassador Patterson. Jake was close enough to hear their whispered conversation. "Something is wrong," the advisor said. "The Velkari are being too cooperative. This feels like a trap. Or maybe they are just tired of fighting," Patterson replied calmly. "Same as us. Do not look for problems where there are none. Accept the win and move forward." The afternoon session brought even more surprises. The Empress proposed a joint military exercise against pirate factions in the border regions. She called it an opportunity for both species to demonstrate their respective strengths in cooperation, rather than opposition. The human delegates were stunned. Joint military operations meant shared intelligence, coordinated strategies, and a level of trust that neither side had shown before. But the biggest shock came near the end of the day. The Empress stood and addressed the entire room, speaking through her translator in a voice that commanded attention. "We have spent years fighting each other," she said. "Both our species have lost ships, colonies, and lives. We have treated each other as enemies because we did not understand each other, but understanding is possible. Cooperation is possible, and it is necessary if either of us wishes to survive in a galaxy that does not care about our petty conflicts. She paused and looked around the room. I propose that we formalize our agreements with a mutual defense pact. If either of our species is attacked by outside forces, the other will provide military assistance. We will stand together against common threats. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. This went far beyond anything anyone had expected. A mutual defense pact meant a true alliance, not just a peace treaty. It meant trust and commitment and a fundamental shift in how both species related to each other. Ambassador Patterson stood as well. The human delegation will need time to consider this proposal, but I can say that we are interested in exploring this possibility further. Of course, the Empress said. Take the time you need. But know that I am serious in this offer. The Velkari Empire wishes to move forward with humanity, not against it. The session ended with both sides agreeing to reconvene the next day. As people filed out of the conference room, Jake caught the Empress's eye for just a moment. She gave the Velkari gesture for acknowledgement, a subtle movement of her upper left hand. It was so quick that Jake almost missed it. But he saw it and he understood. She was thanking him. That evening, Jake returned to his quarters feeling drained but satisfied. He had watched history being made. He had seen two species that had been at war begin the process of becoming allies, and he knew that he had played a small but important part in making it happen. His communicator chimed. It was a message from Ambassador Patterson. Morrison, report to my office at 800 tomorrow. We need to discuss your new role in more detail. Also, well done today. Your instincts were correct, Jake smiled. He set his communicator aside and looked out the window at Centauri Prime. The planet looked peaceful from up here, beautiful and serene. Maybe that was how the galaxy would look someday, if humans and Velkari could figure out how to work together. Maybe being in the wrong room at the wrong time had been exactly right after all. The summit continued for 3 more days. More agreements were reached. Trade routes were established. Technology sharing protocols were finalized. And by the end of the week, both sides had signed a preliminary mutual defense pact. The details would need to be worked out over the coming months, but the foundation was solid. Jake attended every session, taking notes and observing. He never spoke with the Empress again, at least not officially. But he felt her watching him sometimes, and he wondered what she was thinking. Did she regret their conversation? Or did she see it as the turning point it had been? He would never know for sure, but it did not matter. What mattered was that the summit had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. What mattered was that two species had found a way forward together. 6 months passed faster than Jake expected. His new role as cultural liaison specialist kept him busy. He traveled between human colonies and Velkari worlds, helping to smooth over misunderstandings and cultural differences. It was challenging work, but he found it far more rewarding than filling out requisition forms. The Mutual Defense Pact had been finalized 2 months after the summit. Both species were still learning how to work together, but progress was being made. Trade was increasing. Scientific exchanges were happening. A few Velkari students were even attending human universities, and some human researchers were working on Velkari colony worlds. Then the message came. Jake was appointed as the human liaison officer for the joint expedition to the Maelstrom Nebula. The Empress had kept her promise. He was given 2 weeks to prepare before reporting to the exploration vessel Unity. When Jake boarded the Unity, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The ship was unlike anything he had seen before. It was a hybrid design, combining human and Velkari technology. Half the crew was human, half was Velkari. They would be living and working together in close quarters for at least 6 months, possibly longer depending on what they found in the nebula. The first few weeks were difficult. Humans and Velkari had different schedules, different dietary needs, different social customs. Arguments broke out over small things. Temperature controls, lighting levels, work shift rotations. Jake found himself constantly mediating disputes and explaining cultural differences, but slowly things improved. The crew began to understand each other better. Humans learned that Velkari needed periods of complete silence for meditation. Velkari learned that humans needed social interaction and casual conversation to stay mentally healthy. Compromises were made. Friendships began to form. Jake worked closely with a Velkari scientist named Krintha. She was younger than most of the Velkari crew, curious and eager to learn about humans. They spent hours discussing their respective species, sharing stories and perspectives. Krintha told him about growing up on a Velkari colony world, about the pressure to conform to traditional ways of thinking. Jake told her about Earth, about human history and the struggles humanity had faced. On the third week of the expedition, during a scheduled rest period, Jake found a small package waiting in his quarters. Inside was a crystal sculpture, beautifully crafted and glowing with a soft internal light. He recognized it immediately as a Velkari tradition. The crystal was given to someone who had shown wisdom or provided important guidance. There was no note with it, but Jake knew who had sent it. The Empress had not forgotten their conversation. This was her way of saying thank you, of acknowledging that their meeting had mattered. Jake placed the crystal on his desk where he could see it every day. It reminded him of that strange night, of the Empress sitting in his chair asking questions about human nature. It reminded him that sometimes the most important moments happened in unexpected places. The expedition made a breakthrough in the 5th week. They discovered an ancient alien structure deep within the Maelstrom Nebula, something left behind by a species that no longer existed. The structure contained technology that neither humans nor Velkari fully understood. But by working together, by combining their different approaches to problem-solving, they began to make progress. Jake watched as human creativity combined with Velkari systematic analysis. A human engineer would propose a wild theory about how the alien technology might work. A Velkari scientist would test the theory methodically, finding the parts that were correct and discarding the parts that were wrong. Then another human would build on those findings with a new idea, and the cycle would continue. It was messy and chaotic, but it worked. Within 3 months, they had unlocked the basics of the alien power generation system. The discovery would revolutionize energy production for both species. It was exactly the kind of breakthrough that made the expedition worthwhile. But more importantly, the expedition proved that humans and Velkari could work together effectively. The crew returned to human space as heroes, celebrated by both species. The success of the Unity mission led to more joint projects, more cooperation, and deeper trust between the two civilizations. Years passed. Jake continued to work in diplomatic relations, rising through the ranks. He became an ambassador himself eventually, though he never forgot his roots as a junior officer who had stumbled into an impossible situation. He saw the Empress in person only 3 times after that first night. Once at a formal state dinner where they exchanged polite greetings, once at the dedication ceremony for a joint human Velkari research station, and once at a small private gathering of people who had been instrumental in forging the alliance between their species. At that private gathering, the Empress approached him during a quiet moment. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," she said, using his old rank. Or should I say Ambassador Morrison now? "Jake is fine," he said with a smile. "Titles seem less important these days." "Indeed." She looked at him with those compound eyes that he had learned to read over the years. "I have often thought about our conversation that night. About the wrong room and the right words." "So have I," Jake admitted. "I wanted you to know that it changed everything for me. Not just my approach to the summit, but my understanding of what was possible. You gave me hope when I had almost lost it." She paused. "I am grateful." "I think we helped each other that night," Jake said. "You needed honesty, and I needed to understand that sometimes breaking the rules is the right thing to do." They talked for a while longer, not about politics or diplomacy, but about their lives and their work. It was comfortable in a way that surprised them both. When the evening ended, they parted as friends, not just as representatives of their species. Jake continued his work for many more years. He trained new diplomats, sharing the lessons he had learned. He never told the full story of that night in his quarters, keeping some details private out of respect for the Empress. But he told enough to teach an important lesson. The most important negotiations do not always happen in conference rooms, he would say to his students. Sometimes they happen in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people. But if you are brave enough to choose honesty over protocol, to see the person behind the title, to risk being vulnerable with someone you are supposed to treat as an opponent, that is when real change becomes possible. He would think about the Empress sitting in his chair, asking him about humanity's survival. He would remember his own exhausted honesty, the way he had spoken without filters or diplomatic careful language, and he would smile, knowing that being in the wrong room had been the most right thing that ever happened to him. The galaxy had changed that night. Not because of grand gestures or official treaties, but because two people had chosen truth over safety. Because an alien empress had broken into a junior officer's quarters looking for understanding. Because a tired human had decided to answer her questions honestly instead of calling security. "You're in the wrong room," he had said. "I know," she had replied, and in being wrong together, in that small room with the blue light of Centauri Prime shining through the window, they had found a way forward that changed both their species forever. That was the most human thing of all, Jake thought, stumbling into the impossible, making it work anyway and calling it a victory, not because they had planned it, or because they were following some grand strategy, but because they had been desperate and honest and willing to take a chance on each other. In the end, that was all any alliance really needed. Trust, honesty, and the courage to meet in the wrong room at the right moment.